This morning's session, having enjoyed a very nice cocktail party and a fantastic skit last night in the hotel grounds. Talking with my colleagues this morning, I think everyone's very excited by this topic. They believe that it'll engender a high degree of debate, and we're really looking forward to that in this session. So, what's the topic? The topic is competition. The topic is market definitions, the issues around competition, significant market share, OTTs, over-the-top services, and the whole move to IP and a whole range of transformation that's occurring in the telecom sector. For your panel this morning, I'm incredibly pleased that and I think kudos to the NCA about organising a great panel. You're going to get perspectives from the Commonwealth. You'll get perspectives from focusing on Europe, but also with an African perspective as well, and also from the US, with a very distinguished lineup of panelists. In terms of this morning, what we'll do is I'll just introduce the speaker, and then I'll pass over to them for their presentation. The first speaker is Mr. Omar Bouhali, if I get that pronunciation right. He's a principal in Analysys Mason's Paris office. He's got over 20 years experience in the telecom sector, both in operational positions and as a consultant. He's given that experience, he's got a whole wide range of regulatory strategy and due diligence projects. He's worked in 35 different countries and across the globe. I think the key thing that I would say is he's got a lot of regulatory experience, so he's going to bring a great perspective to this. He was an engineer with the French Corps of Mines, giving him a valuable insight into those institutions. He holds 2 Masters of Engineering and a Master of Advanced Studies. Over to you, good sir.
Thank you very much. Do you have a presentation? So what I'm going to talk to you about is the impact of OTT services on regulatory market definitions in Europe. The reason why I selected Europe is that we have a wide range of national decisions on the same kind of subject, and it's quite interesting to compare these decisions, and from there to take some to understand the roots of that, and this can then be applied to different markets. I'm going to start with a few definitions. Thank you. At the bottom? You can if you want. Well, it's okay. So first, market definition. Everybody's not necessarily fully familiar with the concept. This all started with antitrust law, where depending on the side of the market that you're selecting, you may reach some very different results. So, for example, if you're focusing on a very specific market niche, you may have a player with a very high, very high level of dominance on this particular niche. But if you expand the market further, then he will be considered just a small player, and therefore a lot of approaches have been developed just to analyze which is the relevant market for such approaches. This includes both in terms of products, and so the question is whether different kinds of products are substitutable or not, and this also applies in terms of geography. Here again, you can focus, for example, on very dense areas, and you will probably get results that are significantly different compared as if you were to look at a whole country, for example. These principles have been, from there, applied also for ex-ante regulation. And so this is a concept that was developed in the early year 2000s. And the principle was to apply the same kind of competition approaches to ex-ante regulation. And from there, you would no longer talk about dominance, but talk about significant market power. And national regulators have a duty to regularly analyze their markets, define the relevant markets, see whether there's significant market power, and if there is, then to take the relevant remedies to address this. Another concept that is important to understand is electronic communication services. So here I've put the definitions that comes from the 2002 Framework Directive. What is important in there is that there are three main criteria. First is that an electronic communication service is a service that is normally provided for remuneration, noting that this remuneration can be either direct or indirect. So in other words, advertising that finances communications is a kind of remuneration, even if the end user doesn't necessarily pay directly. These services consist wholly or mainly on the conveyance of signals, which is something, well, that is fairly direct to understand. And it excludes any form of editorial control. So basically, having a website is not an electronic communication service. Now, over-the-top services. What is interesting is that for quite a long time, over-the-top services were defined as an exclusion to other services. So basically, there were the services by the operators, and any service that was not operated by an operator was an OTT. This makes things a bit difficult when you ask yourself the question whether there's substitutability. BEREC, which is the grouping of the national regulators in Europe, has worked on the subject and has defined a positive definition. And this positive definition is content, service, or an application that is provided to the end user over the public internet. There are many consequences to that, and that are important for what we're talking about. First, although usually an OTT provider is not an internet access provider, with this definition, there can be some situations where actually they're the same. You just need to be aware of that. Sorry, there's a bit of echo. Okay, thank you. Second consequence, OTT refers to the way a service is delivered, not to its nature. So it can include both some content, so just, for example, pure music or video or whatever, a service, or an application. It doesn't really matter what it is. The only point is that it is provided over the public internet. Public internet means open to the public. So not, for example, inside a VPN for a company. From there, there can be situations where an OTT may qualify as an electronic communication service, and we'll see some details just after. And even if it doesn't qualify as an electronic communication service, it may compete with other electronic communication services. So here you have some classic examples. So first category, where you have OTT services that qualify as electronic communication services. It has been widely recognized that things like Skype in or Skype out, so voice services that have numbers and that can be interconnected to the PSTN for incoming and outgoing call, they just qualify as electronic communication services. This, in some jurisdictions, can have some impact. So, for example, they have to pay for universal service fees and all these kind of effects. The second category, examples of the second category are just Skype or instant messaging like WhatsApp. They do not interconnect with the public phone, but however, they may compete in the sense that if you contact someone with WhatsApp, maybe you can avoid a call, or it's the same thing with Skype. However, one important difference is that the two persons on both sides have to be on the same system and have to use this system. So it's not interconnected with the public telephony system. Third categories, where you're still one step further, include things like Netflix or Amazon, where, well, actually you access to a service, but there is no direct competition with what is usually an electronic communication service. After this introduction, we can see what happens on voice services. So we'll start with pure voice services. So as you know, every 3 to 5 years, every European regulator has to conduct market analysis on a series of markets, some of them being predefined by the European Commission, some of them being added by national regulators, and we'll get a few examples of these a bit later. So in terms of voice, there have been some changes, but basically there have been some markets, either 2 or 1, about access to telephony, and also markets about traffic. And it has changes over time. The number of markets has evolved, but basically there's this big difference. And on all of this, on these markets, the question has been raised whether OTT services, we talked about Skype, that's a good example, but there are some others, should be taken into account. And then the key question is whether they are substitutable enough to standard telephony services in order to be considered in the same market. The majority answer to the question up to now has been no. So most of the national regulators have considered that there were really some questions either of quality of service or interoperability that made OTT services outside of the relevant markets. 3 examples, however, are interesting to look at. The first one is Norway, and Norway is a country where during a market analysis, an OTT services has been included in the relevant market. And 2 others are Spain and Portugal, where the regulators have assessed this. And as you will see, it's interesting to see what the conclusion was, but it had no impact whatever, because actually the markets was liberalized. So in Norway, we were in a very specific situation. There was a national provider of OTT voice services who had a significant market share, and it had a solution that enabled to both receive and place calls to the PSTN. Basically, what it was selling is an adapter to put to a PSTN phone that went through the internet up to their server, and then it could call people with the same system or with standard PSTN, and of course they were incoming call with the PSTN. This service complied with every obligation that a telephony service had, including number portability. Of course, there were some standard numbers, and it played a significant place in it had a significant market share on the market. And in this precise situation, the Norwegian regulator decided to include this service in the same market as access, and therefore to take into account the SMP determination. Oops, sorry. Oh, yeah, sorry. Yeah. In Spain, we had the same question. Now there was a more formalized framework, because there was a ministry order from 2005 that explicitly qualified what they call nomadic services as electronic communication services. A nomadic service is a service through which people can connect to a number of different access points in the country, and from there have a telephony service. So this includes numbering, and they were actually even geographic numbers. And there were some obligations, including interoperability with publicly available telephone services, and free emergency calls. So there was quite a framework about that. In 2008, the CMT, so the Spanish regulator, had to consider whether it wanted to deregulate traffic, so telephone traffic, and from there it had to decide whether these nomadic services were part of the same market. Actually, they concluded that it was not in the same market because there were no service level agreements. And so from there, the quality of service was not as good as standard telephony. So they decided to exclude it from the market. In Portugal, we had the same questions, roughly the same context. I'm not going to spend too much time on that. Portugal had to take the same decision whether to deregulate traffic, and they took just the opposite conclusion as in Spain. They considered that actually between standard telephony, VoIP telephony monitored from end to end by operators, and nomadic voice services, these three services were very close and actually were mainly substitutable. And therefore they considered that these three services were in the same market. However, because there was competition, they lifted regulation on this market. So, as a conclusion on voice, the majority answer is that OTT services are currently considered in Europe not to be very substitutable with standard voice services. There are just two exceptions. One in Norway, one in Portugal, where they were considered as substitutable, but it was really in specific case where you had services that were very close, that has some numbers, and that were really actually used as substitutes to the telephone. Now we can go to non-voice services. Here we're in a more specific situation, which is about SMS termination. A few countries have added SMS termination as a relevant market. And for this, they have to prove that it passes what we call the 3 criteria test, basically to say that if there's no regulation, then the market will not evolve to competition naturally. And from there, one of the key aspects is to know whether there is a substitute, and more precisely, whether there is indirect competition from the retail side on SMS termination. And one of these can be things, for example, all the messaging systems used by, for example, on the iPhone or these kinds of services, so of OTT services. So France was the first country to work on this, and the first decision dates from 2006. And at that time, RCEP found that there were no substitutes. And the key aspect is the non-ubiquity of smartphones and mobile data packages. So RCEP noticed that people with smartphones could use OTTs as substitutes to SMS, but basically the penetration was quite low, and therefore not many people did that, and therefore did not impact the SMS market and not the SMS termination market. From there, RCEP regulated the market. RCEP reached the same conclusion 4 years later, in 2010, and once again in 2014. However, at that time, the European Commission expressed some serious doubts, which is basically it blocked the decision to talk clearer. And the reason it took is that between 2009 and 2014, smartphone penetration in France had increased from 16% to 53%. As you know, market definition should be forward-looking, so there were some expectations that this percentage would increase. And in this context, the point was that instant messaging became a credible substitute. And from there, the SMS termination had to be deregulated. And basically, that's what RCEP did. I have to be quick because time flows. So we have the same thing basically in Denmark. So in 2011, DBA concluded that there was no significant substitutability and that therefore SMS termination had to be regulated. And in 2015, it took the opposite decision for the same reasons, because smartphones had become ubiquitous, and so were data packages, and therefore there was substitutability from OTT services to SMS. So, as a conclusion on non-voice services, we're going the other direction as for voice services. We had a situation where there was very limited substitutability, which therefore enabled to regulate SMS termination. Now, in many countries, with the development of smartphone usage and data usage, OTT services are more and more considered as substitutable to SMS, and therefore they do change the market definition. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Omar. I think a very good presentation, walking us through the journey that's occurred in Europe, looking at some of the starting blocks, looking at some of the definitions, going through the BEREC studies, and then what qualifies as an electronic communication services, and then looking both at voice and also data and SMS services, and looking at the different approaches taken by a range of regulators, both in Spain and Portugal, in relation to voice, a little bit on Norway, and some of the non-voice evaluations in France and Denmark. So I think a very excellent summary of those things, and we appreciate it. If you can just put your hands together for Omar again, thank you very much. In our second presentation, and we will have a time at the end for questions on all the speakers. In our second presentation, I'm incredibly pleased to invite to present to you that our next speaker is Dr. Mark Jamison. I had previously heard of the Public Utility Research Centre, and so it's a very great pleasure that he's able to join us today. Mark is a director of that centre at the University of Florida. He serves also as Director of Telecommunications Studies. He provides international training and research and research on business and government policy. He also is a research associate globally with the University of Florida Centre for Public Policy Research, with Cambridge Leadership Associates, and he's also an affiliated scholar with the Communications Media Centre at the New York Law School. Dr. Jamison's not only talks and researches things, he's also, as we say, walked the walk. He was manager of regulatory policy at Sprint and head of research for the Iowa Utilities Board and a communications economist for the Kansas Corporation Commission. The rest of his CV is very lengthy, and so I think rather than cutting into his time, let's hear the wise words from himself. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Scott. One of the perils of being an academic is your CV gets very long. And that's because we don't settle on anything. We tend to move around a lot. So I'd like to start just by thanking the NCA for allowing me to speak today. The work that you've been doing has been noted around the world. I was speaking just shortly with your chairman yesterday, and he said it's his aspiration that he builds a world-class regulator, and I think you're well on your way to that. I don't think it'll be very many years until people, I think it's true. People will be looking to what Ghana has done. Said, I'd like to try that. That looks like an interesting thing to do. And I think that the way you've designed this panel today and phrased the question is indicative of that. You've asked the question, does digitalization change how we think about market definition? You didn't ask if it changed market boundaries, you asked if it changed the boundaries of market definition. And I think that changes everything in how we consider these questions. And I want to compliment you for that, because as I've worked around the world and worked with people, people ask the question, does traditional voice and OTT, do they compete in the same market? That's not really the question you asked. You asked, does digitalization, does this ability change the boundaries of market definition? And I think that changes everything for us. To illustrate the thinking that you took me through for this paper and this presentation, I'm going to use someone that's a little bit different. Let me step into a different industry, and then we'll step back into networking. How many of you are familiar with Jobberman? Okay, a few of you are. Who in here is from Vodafone? You did not raise your hand. Vodafone uses Jobberman, so yeah, okay, now he knows. He's got it. All right. Yeah, Jobberman is a platform. It's a website in Africa where people can advertise jobs and people can apply for jobs. And as you are, as an employer or a potential employee trying to connect with each other, it will be involved in sending you SMS messages and emails and giving you advice on how you could do this better. All that's enabled by these digital platforms. But it's not very hard to think about how easily that could change given digitalization. That what Jobberman could very easily add is maybe video messaging, kind of like what YouTube does or Instagram does, where a potential employee could include a video. Oh, here, look how charming I am, how energized I am, how I phrase things when I talk, and an potential employer could show things about the company visually. And that's not a far stretch as to what they could do. They could also add real-time voice. Hey, by the way, you're online. I noticed this person you're applying to for a job is online. Would you like to speak? Or would you like to talk via video? That's pretty easy functionality to add as well. And by the way, I've noticed that as a potential employee, you've been applying for these types of jobs for 2 or 3 months, and you're not having success yet. I've noticed this because I'm watching what you do. Let me send you 2 or 3 videos that will enhance your skills in that area. And if you like those, I will sell you some more for $50, and then you're more likely to get that job. So what Jobberman would be doing is saying, okay, I notice these people I have a relationship with, they have an aspiration, and they have a reality. And I am trying to help people fill that. Anything I can do digitally to fill that gap. I don't care what markets I'm in, I don't care how you define the product. I'm trying to fill a gap. And by the way, I've noticed that some employers are hiring people to do some things they really don't need people for a long time for, so we could have what we call a gig economy. That someone could sign up to say, well, I will do some translation work for you on a particular project, or I do graphic design and I will work on a project for you. And it's very easy to find that workspace. I'll have a cloud where you can exchange documents, you can talk over VoIP, you can talk via video for that 2 or 3 days that week, that 2 weeks that you're working together. All this is very easy to do. The only question is, what are the customer's aspirations? What are their realities? And what things do we try to do to fill those gaps? And if Jobberman fills gaps that way, I have no idea what market it's in. Digitalization, my opinion, changes everything. It changes completely how we think about what is or is not a market and whether or not we even should. Because my conclusion is going to be that regulators should quit worrying about what a market is and worry about what would make a market not competitive, whatever that market might be. Not what the market is, but is there something that whatever these markets transform into will keep them from being competitive. Let me go now to the communications industries. This is from a paper actually 23 years ago. We were working on this, and we wanted to look at convergence, and we noticed that most communications industries started with a highly specialized technology that drove a market and then drove government policy. So with publishing, it was the offset press many centuries ago, enabling markets for books and newspapers, and the customer interface and the way the information was distributed was integrated into the technology. The customer saw the text, the customer received a physical product to look at. Telecommunications, it was lines and switches at the start, occurring about the same time that broadcasting using radio technologies, but they grew up in the silos. For telecommunications, it was voice and data. We had a lot of public policies evolve around those, and for broadcasting as well. But again, for telecommunications, the telecommunications technology was specialized to voice. It was auditory. We heard it, we spoke it. Broadcasting, it was visual or auditory, but it was very specific to that. And you can see the same thing in computers. That's not the emerging reality for today. Our emerging reality today is that our technologies have converged. We now have general purpose technologies. They're digital, they're packet-based. They actually blur the lines between routing, transmission, and storage. All of these things become blurred, and that gives us converged carriers, where they have generalized, not general purpose, but generalized communication channels that allow whatever kinds of communications that you are doing. I'm not pointing very well for some reason. I won't bother to point. And notice that there are apps that get built on top of that. The app is now the interface. The digitalization of these technologies tears apart the customer interface from the channel. It used to be the channel, the customer interface were integrated together. Offset press, telecommunications, broadcasting, computers, they were all integrated into the technology. That's not the case anymore. Now we're still, well, let me say it this way first. If we're thinking about telecommunications operators, telecommunications carriers, this changes the business model radically. The future is not in the app world for the telecommunications carrier. That's a whole different type of business, a whole different type of innovation, a whole different kind of market. In my opinion, that market is gone. telecommunications operators are in the channels business. And the aspiration we're trying to address for telecommunication, for networking, is for the app providers and the people who are using them, what are their aspirations? What are their current realities? How do we fill that gap? We won't be that voice interface. We won't be that video interface. We won't be that text interface for the customer. That is going to be someone else's business. As the operator, we're down here in the channels business. We're still in the death throes of how this is changing. And every place I go in the world, people are struggling. How do the business models change so that things can move forward? But it changes radically what the business question is. It's not about what is my market, what is my product, it's who do I know and what can I do for them. And it changes radically, I think, the essential regulatory question. It's not about markets, but is there something as this market keeps moving along? There's actually multiple markets, multiple generations. Is there something that causes monopoly to emerge and endure? And that's, I think, the essential question. Our traditional view of monopoly, and this is how we understand market power, was exactly as Omar described it. We first try to define what is the market, and I won't go through the mechanics of how we do that. It's well understood. It's the best practice that we have. It's imperfect. We know it's imperfect. It's just the best we've been able to create. But we first try to figure out what is the boundary of the market. What is that boundary beyond which customers don't substitute? It's all in here. Everything that customers view as a substitute is in that market. That's our definition. And then do we observe market power within it? Do we observe monopoly power within that? The problem we have is that in order to do that, we have to start with our historical data. That's the only place we can get data. And we apply it to today's situation. And then we make projections about the future, because all of our actions are in the future. In order for that to be legitimate, in order for the way we answer the question to fit reality, then there has to be some stability, some continuity from past into present into future. We just don't have that. And so I don't think this is the right kind of a question for regulatory purposes. I think it's exactly a very good question for businesses to ask, but not so much for regulation, because we just don't have the stability and the tie. In my perspective, market power is a fleeting thing, unless there's some factor that endures over time that creates monopoly across generations of products and services. As the generations change, there's something in the technologies, there's something in the physical layout that causes it to almost always be a monopoly. That's what we're looking for. The factors that create monopoly, not the emergence of monopoly itself. Traditionally, when we thought about monopoly, we thought about, well, we will analyze the outcome and see is that a monopoly, but we knew there were things that drove that. Maybe there were scale economies, switching costs, customer bases, essential facilities. There are things that create monopoly. But we didn't really look at those as much as we looked at outcomes. But we know that this is true. And so in saying regulators should focus on factors that endure and drive us to monopoly, I want to know which of these are going to be true over time and are going to drive us towards monopoly, and it's not going to be all of them. For example, I don't think that scale economies are going to drive us to monopoly because that's specific to a product. As products change, scale economies go away or change or emerge. I don't think switching costs are going to be relevant. Customer base is something that's actually created by a company. So these I don't think are going to be these enduring factors for monopoly that I'm referring to. But essential facilities very well could be. Exclusive permissions could be. Exclusive rights of way could be. Those are the kinds of things we'd be looking for. Do we find those? And if we find them, what do we do about them? I think something is an enduring factor for monopoly if it has these characteristics. One is it has to be a factor for monopoly. It has to be an input, broadly defined, not just trucks or something like that, but very broadly defined as an input that is needed by all suppliers. Everyone who's involved in networking needs this. And its supply is limited. And because its supply is limited, competition fails. And that this is true across generations of products and services. Because so even if the markets evolve, if OTT does indeed compete with traditional voice or whatever emerges next, if this endures across all those technologies, then I'm worried about it. If it doesn't, then in 2 or 3 years, the situation's changed anyway. And as an analyst, I'm not in your seats as a regulator, but as an analyst, I'm less concerned. You may have to worry about it a little bit more. I think these are probably going to be rare for us. So for example, there may be some spectrum or physical space that's very essential for 2G, 3G, 4G services. I don't know a lot about 5G, but my impression is it changes a lot. I don't know if it changes everything, but it changes a lot. It certainly changes architectures for networks. It changes how people share facilities, how they work together or don't. It changes what the networks do. That may be where we suddenly have a breakdown of factors that have created monopoly in the past. It might be limited conduit or right-of-ways, and Rwanda dealt with this recently. They said, okay, we think that this causes us to have monopoly, so the government opened a trench and said, everyone put your fiber optics here, and did away with that as something that would create a monopoly. Thailand, special relationship between some high-level government officials and some telecom operators, that helped create a lot of market power, and Thailand is still struggling with that. Hong Kong, they said, well, we got enough spectrum, we have enough conduits, that's not a problem. Building entry is a problem. A lot of buildings are only allowing one network in. We will deal with that. That was the factor that caused enduring market power. Implications, for me, I think that this then becomes the focus of the regulation. Not worrying about, do we have a market in particular where there is market power, but do we have something that makes that true? And deal with the thing that makes it true. For the OTT, I think it changes the business questions. If I'm an operator and I'm struggling with my customers are moving to the OTT services, they're telling me something, that they have an aspiration I'm not satisfying. And I need to know what to do with that. And maybe it is I completely transform my business model. And I think that's probably the case, that the sources of revenue for the future are not the sources of revenue we have today. For the regulator, do any of these possess these enduring factors that drive monopoly? If they do, then I've got a market power problem, regardless of what the market is. I'm going to have a market power problem. Otherwise, I don't. And certainly regulation needs to give the operators, anyone else in the transition we're talking about, the opportunity, the space to change that market model, because it really is changing. And the sources of revenue for today won't be the sources of revenue for the model for tomorrow. What drives success today isn't going to drive success for tomorrow. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much. An excellent presentation. One that I certainly will take away and give it a lot more thought to. He, in his presentation, started off thinking about Jamison as an example of how to illustrate how digitalization changes everything. He then went on to talk about the focus on competitiveness, some of the challenges, trying to, do we need to repack some of the definitions that we have looking at monopolies, significant market power, and about how those business models need to change, and how we need to focus really on the real core elements that engender monopoly or significant market power. He spoke about market power being fleeting and about some of the discontinuity that's occurring in those markets, before then at the end linking that to some of the OTTs and about some of the market positionings and customer needs that they are currently delivering on. So I think, thank you very much, and if we can bring our hands together again for an excellent presentation. The third presentation is from Dr. Martin Koyabe. He is the Head of Technical Support and Consultancy at the Commonwealth Telecommunications Organisation. He joined the organisation in 2014 as head of research and consultancy division. He has extensive technical expertise and experience working in the telecom sector on ICT research, development and implementation projects. Prior to joining the CTO, he was a senior researcher technical lead in information security with BT for over 10 years, and he did a number of roles in that position. He was also, since joining the CTO, he's led a number of broadband and cybersecurity projects across Africa and also a range of other markets and in the Pacific. He's a technical expert and reviewer for both in the EU and the ITU. He has a PhD in communications engineering from Aberdeen University in the UK and an executive education in service and managing innovation from the Judge Business School at the University of Cambridge. If you can welcome Martin to the lectern. Thank you.
Thank you very much. First of all, let me want to thank my previous speakers for having done the hard work for me. What I have here is something on OTTs. And I don't want this to be me speaking to an audience. I want it to be a discussion. I want it to be some resolution that we need to come out with. There is so much that has been discussed about OTTs since yesterday. We had the minister or the deputy minister, we had the chairman of NCA and the director of NCA talking about OTTs as a reality. So let's just demystify and try and understand what is this within OTTs. And I'll take 3 steps. So the first step would be, let's look at OTTs and then look at what are the issues in terms of advantages and disadvantages, take a few examples, and what CTO we are trying to do in this particular space. So I think the truth is that OTTs is here to stay. And I think the map shows you that we've got so many of these applications out there. And I think regulators, and I'm glad we have this very, very, very poignant meeting here, have realized that it is important we have this discussion. And if they're here to stay, what do we do? How do we start and where do we start? And here is where we come in. In terms of the drivers, so first of all, I think it's important to understand what is it that is driving OTTs? Why are OTTs being the topic of today and tomorrow and probably in the future? I think the point is very clear. The future service model is actually based on the communication. And I think Omar gave that particular allusion, and also the previous speaker talked about OTTs being used as a means for communication in the definition that we saw earlier. And then the services are easier and they are rapidly able to expand because it uses multiple platforms whereby you can deploy the OTTs if you wanted to. Availability of bandwidth is another incentive, whereby when you have high-speed availability, then it's a good avenue for having OTT applications because then you can be able to deploy services. The growth of smartphones, and in fact, smartphones are becoming much cheaper. I had a discussion the other day whereby smartphones in China, for example, are sort of, they look like the new iPhones or the new, Samsung, for example. And they're becoming cheaper, they're affordable. And due to that, it becomes an attractive proposition for having an OTT service downloaded onto your smartphone for you to be able to use it. The deployment of cloud infrastructure creates another incentive as well. What cloud does is that it actually makes what we call the champagne model. I want it now, anywhere, any place, on any device in terms of services. And that's exactly what we do. We want services anywhere, anytime, at any place. And therefore, the cloud service provides that particular model of how you can actually operate in that way. In terms of what it is, in terms of how you separate these OTTs, I think Omar gave a very good definition, but I'll just look at it from a point of practicality. So one of the types of OTTs, you've got the voice and messaging. The voice and messaging. And the figures tell you a lot, because then you can see in those particular figures, we've got roughly about, WhatsApp, for example, takes roughly about 1 billion users. So WhatsApp has reached the 1 billion mark. When you take the Messenger for Facebook, for example, it's roughly about 900 million. So these are numbers. These are big numbers. They're attractive. They're huge numbers. And then when you look at Skype and the rest, then you can actually have that. And these figures keep changing, okay? So we know that there's an attractiveness of some sort, and I'll talk about it very shortly. Then there is what we call application-based, whereby you have an ecosystem that provides you with some services, storage services. And I think Dropbox is one example. We have seen iCloud as another example. And again, the list goes on and on, yeah? And you can also go to Google Drive. You can have something like SugarSync. These are what we call application-based type of OTTs, okay? And then you move on to another type, which is very common, where you have the TV and the video and the audios, where you can stream your videos. And I'm sure we're actually streaming this right now via YouTube. That's another good example of how OTTs are working. But there's something underneath this which we need to understand. And I think it's very important that regulators and any other person thinking of making policies or regulation or having to look at this particular area, we need to understand of what I call the stickiness effect. There's something sticky about these issues. So first of all, when you look at compatibility, OTTs are compatible throughout devices. You can either run it on an Xbox, you can run it on any particular OS operating system, you can run it on, you can run it anywhere, on Symbian. So basically, that is an attractive. It gives that stickiness effect. It means that if I have an OTT application, I can run it in any particular compatible environment that I have, okay? Then the next thing is to look at the infrastructure for mobile phone, for example. Someone has just talked about 5G. And when you look at 5G, for example, here, we are now talking about 5G maturing roughly about 2030. So which means OTTs are really here to stay. Some of us might not live until 2030, but there you go. So these things are here to stay. They use the platforms. And these platforms are mobile platforms, meaning it gives you the convenience, the agility to move around, okay? The other aspect that you have to look at is the issue of the applicable of various platforms. So for example, you can actually run it on a TV, you can run it on your iPad, and you can run it in any particular device that you want. And it's very convenient for parents who compete with the children for the remote, the remote control. Because children nowadays want to use the same TV, so you find that, okay, you can give this child Netflix to load it on a specific device while you use the TV for something else. And it's very convenient. So this convenience, these are the sticky effects that make people want to use OTTs from time to time. Then we have the issue which I call, I think this is an image here whereby one thing that is true is that OTTs themselves are actually free. This image here, I think it didn't come in the sequence that I wanted, but if you look carefully, that is actually President Erdogan. 3 days ago on our TV sets, we saw images that were very, very, not necessarily disturbing, but they were very, very disturbing from the fact that there was a coup attempt in Turkey. But the key thing was that the president himself made a phone call through FaceTime to a television station that was not available. And that particular phone call was actually free. And when he made the phone call, it is said and it's alleged that that was the turning point. And he told the television station to tell people in Turkey that they should take back their government. They should go to the public square and take back their government. And when you can see those images, those are those are individuals trying to restrain those individuals without any arms. Again, it is a free telephone conversation that took place that brought probably peace in that particular part of the world. So there you go. So there are bits that are free and there are bits that needs to be understood. In my point here, we need to first of all look at the impact of OTTs. What is the impact? And you can look at the impact in two ways. You can either look at them in terms of advantages or you can look at them in terms of disadvantage. When I was talking to Kwaku yesterday, the CEO of the Ghanaian Chamber of Commerce, and he's not here, we had a very animated discussion, as you can imagine. And I was telling him that it depends on where you sit. It depends on where you stand in terms of the OTT view. And I think when you look at the advantage and the disadvantage, I think the point is very clear that where everyone stands, they want to look at OTTs from their point of view. So we need to understand what are the key advantages and disadvantages. And to understand that, it's a long list here. One of the issues is that there is a benefit from a worldwide coverage. So let's just try and understand some of the advantages. When it is based on internet, it means it is worldwide. And there's a challenge because when you have something that is dependent on the internet, it is very difficult to apply the physical world type of policy and regulation on something that is actually virtual. That is an understanding that needs to be understood very clearly. And then when you go to exploiting economy of scales, it takes advantage of the scaling. When Google goes, or when Facebook, for example, goes and buys WhatsApp, they already know how much it will scale, how much it will go. Someone yesterday said, we hope that in future, when we come for this meeting again, we'll find innovators made in Ghana owning companies that are startups from Ghana. It is true, we might get them. But the point is that a big company will come and buy them because they know there's economy of scale. So therefore, there's that one. And then there's an exploitation of broadband connectivity. They exploit the broadband connectivity. Benefits from public revenues, whereby if you can advertise through marketing channels, you can actually make more revenue. And then there's also the high negotiation power that they attract. When you have an attractive OTT application, someone will come and buy you out very quickly because they'll give you the money and they'll buy you out. And therefore, they expand that particular significant market if they wanted to. So that is one of the areas that we look at. And these advantages are very powerful in terms of innovators, especially the young people who are not in this room, majority of them. But the point is that this is what attracts the creativity around OTTs. So we have to understand that even if you suppress OTTs, you are actually suppressing this amount of innovation, the amount of movement going forward. Then we have the issue of the disadvantages. Now, I'm not taking sides here in order to vilify OTTs, but I'm trying to make sure that we understand what is it that we are saying is the disadvantage of OTTs, okay? On one part, there is the end-to-end quality of service. It's very difficult. If I own a network, or let's say one operator A and another operator B, and one of my customers in the network of operator B, and the service is in operator A, it's very difficult to guarantee the quality of service across those autonomous systems, or each domain. So that one is something that you cannot assure unless you have an agreement across all the end-to-end. Less advantage for proximity. So for example, if you're going to do customer experience based on OTT services, it's difficult because sometimes it's varied. We don't mind to have a grainy video, but so long as the sound is clear. Yeah? We don't mind watching football, maybe it comes at half an hour, but so long as we can hear the sound. So there's that accommodation, and you cannot leverage that in the quality of service experience that many regulation regimes would require. There's lower capacity of national dependency. It is very difficult to make sure that you have a jurisdiction application on an OTT service. Especially when it's being done from the US or it's being done from another country, they will always come to this particular country depending on who is buying the service, okay? There's also lack of contribution to the Universal Service Fund. I think we talked about this yesterday. It is difficult to get the revenues that are generated from OTT applications so that you can apply them into the Universal Service Fund of specific countries. We've seen things like revenue loss. This is something that has already been talked about. There's also things like the taxation, whether it's evasion or avoidance. That is something that is there to be discussed because countries are losing revenue because of the lack of revenue being paid by the OTT services. So this is the way that we need that particular revenue. There's the personal data protection and privacy issues. Now, this was raised yesterday. The point here is that depending on who is collecting your information, depending on how they're collecting that information, it is very difficult for an individual to know what they're going to do with that particular information. Okay? So you can put regimes in place, but as soon as that information is collected, it is difficult for a customer to be able to know how that information is collected. Let's look at a few examples here, and I thought this was important. We've had countries that are either taking action in specific ways. And this one, I just brought it here for the purpose of the discussion. We've seen a case where South African MTN and Vodacom wanted to actually to have OTTs regulated. This is something which is in the press. It is something that is ongoing. Now, but there's one player, Cell C, who was feeling otherwise because they don't have the market significance. So they want to make sure that they use the data bits within that particular market significance. And again, this has not been resolved. It is still in Parliament and they're being debated. So that is just one example. The other example here is the Communication Authority of Kenya with the Kenya Film and Classification Board. Netflix said they were going to that region of the world. The film board was saying, look, we have to treat them like a broadcaster. Okay? But on the other side, Communication Authority says, no, these are OTTs. We don't have to treat them like a broadcaster. So what does that do? It brings a debate. So right now, Kenya, what they're doing is that they're looking at the ICT policy in order to say, how do we address the OTT issue? Which is, again, a level of discussion that is going on. In Morocco, we've seen a case where they've literally banned VoIP. And people took on the streets. They said, this is not good. This is not going to be very innovative enough. You're actually stifling innovation. But they say we are banning that because the revenues of our operators was being affected by the messaging services and the VoIP that is being run. And again, we've seen that in UAE as an example. These are examples that tell you there is a discussion that is going on. Okay? And then when you go back here is what are we doing from a CTO perspective? So I'll be very quick here. We've been listening to stakeholders. We've been listening to the people we are answerable to. In most of our regulatory workshops that we do run, and I'm glad a few of you who are here have come to those regulatory workshops, we do listen. And one thing that has always cropped up is the issue of OTTs. What do we do with it? How do we actually understand it? We've taken the decision to do a study. This study is not going to have a conclusive end, but it will go build the building blocks that will be able to inform people who take decisions, whether at policy level, at regulatory level, at any other level, to take informed decision on what to do going ahead. And we believe there is value in that particular study coming forward. So this particular study, we are hoping to actually develop a good practice operational framework. What is it that someone has to understand when it comes to OTTs? And remember, this is a moving target. We might be talking about OTTs today, tomorrow is something else. So this is a moving target. So we believe that if we come up with this particular way of a discussion, which is amicable, peaceful, and of course, on a reasonable basis, it will be helpful for regulators across the world. We are going to look at issues. We know there are issues to do with licensing, quality of service, quality of experience. We know there are issues to do with infrastructure, data protection. These are issues that will be looked at in that particular study. We also know there are potential issues that has to be examined, security, privacy, national economy, and all that. We'll look at those particular issues within the study. We know there are case studies that are already going on. I've mentioned a few contentious issues. We know they're there. I'm sure Ghana is not unique to that. There should be some issues there. And finally, we hope to come up with a questionnaire. So this questionnaire will be sent to whoever is interested to give us the specific questions that you want us to ask, and therefore we'll send it to many stakeholders. And when we get back the information, we'll be able to share with you. What are we going to do next? This is what we are planning to do. We've already formulated the questionnaire. Right now, we're in the process of formulating the questionnaire. We are hoping to get feedback by the end of July for the first stage of the questionnaire. Once we get the answers right, we will send to any of the stakeholders who are here. Just feel free, see me, give me your card, or send me an email. I'll leave you an email shortly. Once you get this questionnaire, we'll send you with those particular questions. And please, feel free to tell us what you want us to ask. We hope by December, we should have everything back. And then before the end of March, we should be able to publish a report that will give you some information on issues to do with OTTs. Okay? And we hope the stakeholders will be able to take part. It is very easy to participate. You simply send an email to that, or send me an email, or give me your card, and we'll make sure that we put you on the database. We hope that we'll be able to send all the questionnaires by December 10th to you to be able to fill, especially for the regulators, and therefore have the report before the end of the first quarter of next financial year. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Martin. I think a very interesting presentation where he talks about OTTs are here to stay. He spoke about some of the drivers of OTTs, the wide range of services being offered in terms of apps, broadband, smartphone penetration increasing, giving more affordability, cloud services. He spoke a bit about your view on OTTs depends on your perspective and trying to understand some of the key advantages and disadvantages. He looked at a whole range of issues from quality of service, universal service, the customization, the potential revenue loss, and tax issues. He spoke about some of the country examples that might be relevant here in Ghana, around South Africa, Kenya, and some of the other countries in the north, UAE, Egypt, and Morocco. And I think very interestingly, and I think very importantly, let me emphasize that, having done questionnaires myself and trying to get input from stakeholders, he went on to talk about what the CTO is trying to do around OTTs, and a study's been commissioned to try and put together a good operational framework. A questionnaire is coming out, and a whole range of things will be done later this year with the finalisation of a report examining a whole range of topics, putting together case studies, and to be finalised by March of 2017. And I think, let me say to you, I think that type of study is very valuable. There's not many studies of that globally, so I think it's really up to you, if you do have concerns or inputs, to really use this opportunity put together by the CTO to help drive those processes and get this good operational framework together. Let me, at this point, thank our speakers and then call for some questions from the floor, because I think that there would be a whole range of questions that people might have. I believe that Omar can answer the questions in French as well, if some of our Francophile speakers would prefer to ask some questions. But we have a very distinguished panel who I think can provide a great good responses or a good insight to some of the things that you might be grappling with in your day-to-day activities, or some of the strategic thinking that you and your organisations, whether they be regulators, operators, or other players, are focused in on. If you could give your name, put up your hand and give your name and organisation, that would be most appreciated. Let me start here over on the left. If we can organise a microphone, that would be great.
Thank you. My name is Osman Issa, Afriwave Telecom, ICH operator. Mine is a contribution. Two things that I would want to talk on. If you look at the market dynamics of Africa, you realize that a majority of the population do not have formal education. This is a market that, of course, we have to make good use of. And if you look at OTTs, most of them are actually developed using international languages. So you talk about English, you talk about French. So I think that we have to put in some effort in order to get some of these OTTs developed in local languages, so that majority of our people out there can actually benefit from this. The other aspect has to do with the boom in OTTs. The barriers that used to exist among nations have been taken away by internet. So we kind of have a one world. Of course, OTTs are good, but I believe that we need to be very careful if we want to actually regulate it. And I am of the opinion that we have to regulate it to the benefit of our people. So for example, we have Ghana. If there's a boom in OTT, okay, so who are those benefiting from this boom? So if the indigents of a particular country, take Ghana, Nigeria, or South Africa, or any other country, their people are not benefiting from the boom that is happening in the OTT, then we have to be very careful. Because as much as possible, If the OTT is doing well and is taking away businesses, and maybe MNOs, mobile operators will have to cut down jobs and other things, it is the indigenes that will lose. So let's try to ensure that we also encourage the indigenes so that they can actually benefit from the success story of OTTs, because at the end of the day, if they don't benefit and they realize that jobs are being taken away to other parts of the world, they will not be happy with us. Thank you.
Thank you, Osman. Let me break up your question into two parts, and I'll ask Omar to talk firstly on the issue of customization, some of the language issues and that perspective, and then I'll give Dr. Martin the opportunity to talk about how we might gain some of the benefits of that, and if Dr. Jamison wants to add at the end, that'd be great. So, Omar?
Yes, thank you. So about customization, yeah, it's true that one of the specific aspects of OTTs is that there are some very important economies of scale, and therefore once a service is developed, the incremental cost to deploy it in many geographies is very small compared as to the cost to develop content in new languages. And this probably explains the current situation where I understand that in many African countries, the services that are available can be in English or in French, but not in local languages. This is, I agree with you that this is probably something that needs to be addressed, and for this there's a need to well, to have local means. So it means that either you should try to find a way so that these OTT services have local representatives and do find a business case in order to be able to do this customization, or this can probably also be something that is laid by operators, because operators do have a local presence, and if you can find some kind of specific agreements between operators and OTT players, there's probably a win-win situation whereby the operators may be able to collect some of the value that comes from the OTT services, and the OTT services may get an easy way to put their content into a local way that is more easy for the population.
Yeah, I think the question about, I mean, that's Osman. I think the question about how you bring value to the local communities, I would look at it in three ways. One would be, first of all, I think the regulation, the policies, and the environment that is created within the context of the players that are existing is important. I'll give you an example. If you look at Ofcom, which is, I think, one of the benchmark regulators in the world, and Ofcom is a UK regulator, what they've done is, when I asked them, what's your position with OTT, they said they've just left the market to decide. Exactly, and that's exactly what they've done. So the point is, it depends on the regulation environment, the regulatory environment that is existing. On one hand, also, you should look at the supply and demand. And in demand side, we are talking about increasing demand by developing relevant content. And I think that is something that has to happen, especially for people to benefit. So the relevant content that is developed, the channels of how you develop that content, and how you actually encourage people to be able to take advantage of the tool sets that are there. And then on the other hand, also, there is an issue about how you innovate. What is the innovation that is coming in? You might find that there could be an OTT application that originates from Ghana. How do we encourage people to be able to innovate those particular applications that can be able to encourage that? So I think there's an ecosystem here, but overall, it is the environment that is put in place. Thank you.
Thank you, gentlemen. Can I call for more questions? Also on the left, down the back, if we can get a microphone to you, that'd be great. Your name and organisation, please.
My name is Mashoud Umuni from NCA Ghana. Yesterday we had a presentation on mobile penetration rates in Ghana. I want to relate that to Dr. Jamison's presentation. Yesterday we were told that MTN controls about 67% of mobile penetration rates in Ghana. And Vodafone is around a little above 20%. Now that by itself is not bad. It shows that MTN may be doing something quite right. And again, depending on where you find yourself, you may be happy or otherwise. Now, from competition point of view, I want to find out whether there's a creeping monopoly by MTN and controlling the market share of mobile penetration in Ghana. If it is the case that there is indeed a monopoly, what is the way forward in that regard? Now, secondly, do you think that it is a fair or healthy development from competition angle to have such development in Ghana? Again, another follow-up question. I'm quite sure that MTN will not stop growth. They will keep on developing. Now, assuming that MTN is to control or come to control 80% of the market share of mobile penetration, what is the implication of that market dominance? What is the implication of that power on NCA itself as the regulator? And what is the implication on other competitors? Thank you.
Thank you very much for your question. In relation to your question, or a hypothetical question on growing market share and what might be the implications, let me pass over to Dr. Jamison for a first response.
All right, thank you. There are a couple of ways that I think about the kind of question that you have. And I don't know the specifics of the Ghana situation, but it's not uncommon. What you described is common amongst a lot of countries, so I'll speak in a bit more of a generality. One of the things that I think it's important to remember, and my own telecommunications regulator in the U.S. tends to forget this, and that is, unless there is something that is a factor that drives MTN towards being a monopoly or near a monopoly, then what we see in a 60, 70, 80, whatever it is, market share, is not that company controlling the market, but customers choosing that operator. It's customers that are making that choice. And if we try to adopt policies that fight back against customers being able to make that choice, we could do nothing but make the customers worse off. They're making those choices. If indeed there's nothing that drives it, it's just about customer choices, then the customers are making those choices because Vodafone, MTN, Google, whoever, is serving them well, and they're happy with that. If we try to break that up, all we can do is lower the value for the customers. So I encourage people to think about it that way. If there's nothing that drives the market towards market power, then it's customer choices. And what we see then is just success in serving customers and not a market power and exploitation of market power.
Thanks very much. Let me just add to that from the chair. You know, we saw it in the Australian market, Telstra gaining a high degree of market share, over 50%. But I think one of the comments, I think, from Dr. Jamison earlier is that monopolies or market share are very fleeting. And what that's then occurred is a real pushback by Singtel Optus, the second player, by Vodafone, and others making major investments in that market space. Because when you get to a certain market share, you're going to have an implications if you're a mobile operator. You're not going to be profitable. And I think that's really the issue. One of the key things that you'll see is an operator that does have some success, I think does spur that competitive positioning from other players. It also demands that those other players make the appropriate type of investments that drive good quality networks that consumers want and are willing to pay for. Can I call for some more questions, please? Maybe from the right of the room, a bit quiet on the right-hand side. It's a very good opportunity. Sir, in the front.
Thank you. Good morning. My name is Saqib Nazir. My question is, do you think that part of the regulator's role should also now perhaps include nurturing innovation in startups, in like OTTs and other things?
Would anyone on the panel like to take that question, or would yeah? You just give a short answer. That'd be great.
Yeah. Well, it's a standard strategic issue for operators. If it's very good to have an open environment and to make development of new applications possible. Now, if operators just concentrate on the network and don't go into innovation, they really take a very high risk of becoming just dumb pipes. And therefore, to see an important part of the value escape them. So it's in the operator's interest to take this strategic decision, and actually often they have a very good knowledge of the market, and therefore they can be quite relevant developing some successful OTT services.
Yeah, I think if you look at what the regulators should do, and this is speaking from my own personal opinion, is that I think they have to be the custodians of creating the environment where the operators should be able to be innovative. And we've seen examples where incumbents come in, they are passed by other players within the same markets. And I think it's always the operators who are innovative in terms of their services that they can survive. I think we've seen in very competitive markets, like in the UK, for example, where British Telecom decided to have their own content. And that was because they knew they had the infrastructure and they needed to compete effectively. So what they did was actually vouch for the same content that B-Sky B was actually offering. And this is the sort of innovation that operators should be able to look at, the nuance and the specific examples where they can make significant gains, especially from the data that is very attractive from the OTT applications, for example.
Let me just also add, I think, from the chair, a comment on that. In relation to your question about the focus of the regulator, what we do see in Asia is a mandated legislative clauses or objectives to about encouraging innovation and encouraging the sector. So if we were to look, for example, at the Singapore's IDA, if we were to look at the Korean KCC, notwithstanding you have this separation between policymaker at the ministry level and regulator, most of those regulators have a mandate to encourage industry development, encourage investment, encourage innovation in those markets. And you certainly do see that in Asia as part of the regulatory mandate. Sir, question.
It presupposes that most people don't really know NCA's new vision, right? Because our new vision actually talks about how we would like to be a world regulator by facilitating innovative solutions for the communications industry. So I will encourage everyone to take a look at our website, look at our new vision,
our mission statement and our core values. And internally, we've also we've created a group that will be basically dedicated to looking at some of these new innovations and how we can translate them to smart, regulations.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think what I understand is we need to close this session. So unless someone had a very burning question to this panel, let me close by saying thank you very much to the audience for the questions, and thank you very much to the panel. If we could express our appreciation in the usual way, that would be great. I'm sure that in the break, if you did have any more, I suppose, questions that you'd rather not put in a public forum or would like to get some advice, they'd be more than willing to talk with you in the break. Otherwise, I close this session and thank you all for your participation.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is
Digital, pa ya Ghana. Ghana gagamde digital.
Ghana gagamde digital. Agomade.
International Telecommunication Union, linye ITU. Wadodoba dukoyu katan lepa haboboma. Na hucho analog ide digital broadcasting. Enya pa Ghana aba ITU pa habobonola na wadegbede yaji.
Looking at the TV Zala for migration.
What's that sound? Let me apply TV alo set top box da. Pogba Jeshida inye digital top of Jeshida lang. Alo na bia ajana po afia digital logo ila TV ang gawa na TV koko la shiwa magache football. Wapla digital set top box ya ayimu digital logo ala na tachola wanao hana o TV ya.
Vidiki le digital broadcasting ya nu.
Nono motata pa kuma kona nyi ayegbedede ha ma kona chito. Alago baba no football ina gadoga ha asa fa so la yama. Program information ila nwa ana na kpoti padodo kwa wonao ba magada funu akuma to kwa wona move kwa TV agio. Digital time for ya da la Ghana. Hana nyanya na chonu na tamu awo na jajado but na vucho analog I digital nwa fokado da National Communication Authority tila 0302 776621 alo 0302 771 701. Don't I my website at www.nca.org.gh. Alo na email me la info@nca.org.gh. The part of the Ministry of Communication, Plan Digital Broadcasting Migration Committee, Tog Bonami.